Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Daily Live. I'm Chef AJ, and thank you so much for being here. If you're just finding me now, I have made it my mission to go live at least once a day, often 2 or 3 times a day since the sheltering in place started, just to create a sense of community and connection and introduce you to interesting people, some who you know and some who you might be seeing for the first time. And I'd like to announce today that this show is now sponsored by California Balsamic Vinegar. What does that mean? I don't make any money from doing this, neither do my guests, but California Balsamic, Thomas and Ethel have been watching the lives really since the sheltering in place started. And he called me up today. He said, I would like to give every speaker that comes on your show, if they live in the United States, because shipping is very expensive. We've had people from Ireland and Australia and Canada, but anyone in the United States that comes on Chef AJ Live, I'd like to send them 2 samples of vinegar in the flavor of their choice. So you are my first guest today that's going to get it. I'm going to try to go back to all the speakers that I've had to see if I can get their addresses and do this as well. So thank you so much, Thomas and Ethel from California Balsamic, for being so generous. And on to today's speaker. I've known him for quite a while, but I don't know why I've never interviewed him before. I really like him. He's a Libra, like my dog Bailey. He's very nice, and he's got an interesting story to tell. We call him Jam because that's his initials. It makes me think of this recipe I make called jam bars every time I eat them. His name is John Allen Mollenhauer, and welcome him to the show. Nice to talk to you again, John.
Oh, it's great to talk to you too, Chef AJ. I want to find out the recipe to those jam bars.
Absolutely. So
vinegar thing, that's great.
You're the first one. So we'll offline, I'll get your address and you'll pick your 2 flavors. So who are you and what do you do?
So I'm a health and performance lifestyle coach. I've been emerging this whole new idea of a performance lifestyle because the people that I generally serve are people who, coming from as you know, the healthy living community for a very, very long time. I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and I really serve, achiever Amy and driven Dan, who often burn out and trade their health for success. They may know better, but they are often just tired, fatigued, overwhelmed. They have so much going on with their business and personal life that they just fall prey to poor lifestyle habits. And, at a very surface level, that's really what I do. I train them, I coach them, I advise them, and I also run a small emerging chain of recovery centers because the Achilles heel in my own life was exhaustion and fatigue. I've always been a high achiever, very driven guy. So we opened up these centers to help people recover from aches, pains, fatigue, and start to get on the path of both not only health and wellness, but of human performance.
And where are these centers located? I didn't even realize you did that.
Yes, our premier center is in Florham Park, New Jersey, and the next one is in Livingston, New Jersey.
That is awesome. Do you want to talk about what's been going on with you recently that called this to my attention when a mutual friend of ours said that you had something you'd been dealing with that's kind of serious?
Well, we were actually just launching our Regina Center. We did a big grand opening. And for the last month and a half, we had too much to accomplish in too short a period of time, which is a very common experience for people. And I actually started getting really depleted and worn down. Now, that's no small thing, AJ, because depletion means lower immunity. And right at the time when we were doing the grand opening, I had just shaken maybe 500 hands within the prior 2 weeks before. So I had no idea really what was going on. And I had blinders on because I really wasn't paying attention to the news. You know what it's like to be an achiever. When you're in the middle of a big project, you just cut everything else out. So I really wasn't that aware of what was happening until about a day before the grand opening. People started asking me, they said, Jam, are you still going to do this? And I was thinking to myself, dude, what you mean, like the grand opening? Am I still going to have it? And they're like, yeah. I mean, the governor did a state of emergency in New York. Then New Jersey followed suit. And needless to say, I had many of the listeners here will know Joel Furman. Joel Furman was speaking at our grand opening. And about 1/3 of the 145 people showed up. So it was still a pretty good event. But that night, like I literally did everything I could. I used some of the technologies that we provide at the center, like infrared sauna and whole body light therapy. So I was able to get some short-term recharging, and had a great event going on. That Sunday, I took the day off, as anybody would, and I had planned to close the center for the next 2 days, like that Monday and Tuesday, and reopen on Wednesday. But then so much happened in such a short period of time where all of a sudden, in a span of 3 days, it was like, you got to shut the center. On that same day, I started coming down with symptoms. That was on a Wednesday. By that Sunday, I was in the hospital. you know, I come from a long background in the fitness industry and health. And as an entrepreneur, you know, I've always been very involved in health and higher performance and, you know, energy and just the whole lifestyle scenario of things. And it was very unlike me to be not being able to breathe. So I walked into St. Barnabas Hospital here in New Jersey. It's one of the biggest health systems, part of the Atlantic health system. And I basically walked in, I got out of the waiting room and I got into triage. I was so dizzy, I started to pass out. I was on the floor and just lying there. Before you know it, a few people scooped me up and they shoved that extremely uncomfortable swab up your nose, which feels like it's going to puncture your brain.
Oh my God.
The test itself woke me up because I was like, oh, wow, because it went all the way up to here. And, and within a week, I went through a very hellacious week for about 7 days there. And within a week, it took 8 days to get the results. So I was already on the other side of the arc, 10 days in or so, when I got the results. They had done a respiratory and pathogens. They checked for flu and pneumonia and things like that early on. So it wasn't that. They quickly figured, and we already knew theoretically it was going to be COVID. And about 10 days later, I got the results, but then I was already in the healing process. And then that was 3 weeks ago, and here I am.
Wow. You're the first, you are a plant-based eater, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And-
You know, it's funny. On the 30th, I actually did an event with Dr. Fermi for a pretty large organization out here in New York. But I have to tell you, the truth of the matter is I was doped up on hydrocodone, which is a part of a prescription that goes into cough syrup. And, you know, people like us, we don't default to medication very easily. I mean, throughout my entire life, I don't default to an aspirin because I think that we should be listening to our bodies when there's mucus, when there's a cough, when there's a fever. You know, you got to let your body do its thing. And speaking little future pace here, just taking the fever out of this equation, the fever is part of what's killing the virus. So if you default to, you know, ibuprofen or aspirin or things like that, you can actually think you're doing something good, but actually exacerbating the disease. Anyway, that Thursday, it was March 30th. This was about March 30th. This was about 8 days after I got the diagnosis, and you know, about a week after the event. I was doing an event with Dr. Furman where we were talking about immunity and how to build immunity. And I was like, God, should I say something that I'm actually, you know, under the auspices, the influences of COVID? And I did. I told him and I told the event organizer. And, you know, in effect, that actually gave me a little more credibility because I was the only one on the phone that actually on the live broadcast that had actually been going through it. And I was right in the thick of it. So yeah, I did. You know, I'd been talking about this. And one little last piece of backstory is the 3 days before I came down with the symptoms, I wrote a blog article called "The 7 Proactive Tips Within Your Control While the World Switches Off Due to Coronavirus." So it was almost as if the universe had me lay out what my plans were going to be for the next 10 to 15 days. Because for the next 2 to 3 weeks, I basically followed those recommendations with the help of my doctor and the hospital. And then I started doing events while in recovery on the subject of immunity. And it's been a whole experience where I was both seriously ill and then went through a couple stages of recovery. But because of the community that I'm tapped into, I've been able to alchemize the experience to determine next steps.
What did it feel like? Because I mean, that's what I think scares a lot of people, because honestly, up until you, I don't know anyone that has tested positive or that has it. So can you enlighten us? And do you think if you weren't as healthy as you were, your outcome would have been far worse?
Well, anybody who's, yes, I do think that that's true. Because there's a lot of people talking theory about COVID, but they actually haven't been through it. They just say it's the flu or it's the pneumonia. Listen, in the thick of it, I was literally, actually, I have it right here. I have a portable one. This is an inhaler, right? So I would literally lift this lid. I would pull this up like this, and then I would have to like inhale multiple times per day to be able to keep my breath. So, I mean, I've never been through that ever. I was really scared actually to take it. And so, you know, I needed medical care in this instance. But I didn't have any pre-existing conditions. The pre-existing condition that I would say I had was I got seriously depleted. This is my Achilles heel as an entrepreneur. This is part of why I teach what I teach. You know, managing your energy is at the crutch. You and I have had brief conversations about this, AJ, right? You can master nutrition, you can master other aspects of lifestyle, but if you tire down and wear down, you know, you basically, a lot of things can still go awry because everything's dependent on the life force. So when I got depleted, I opened the door wide open. But then this was something unique. This was something novel. And I lost my breath. I lost my taste. I put Vicks underneath my nose and couldn't even smell it. All I could feel was that sort of mental effect. But anybody who's been in the healthy living community knows that when you get sick fast. And it's usually pretty swift and hard. And then it goes away pretty fast. It's not sort of a lingering thing. And that's what I think my experience was like, because I had no pre-existing conditions other than fatigue that had built up because of the grand opening, which would have been true for anybody, right?
People are asking how old you are, if you don't mind.
51.
51, great. Were you ever scared that you were going to have to go on a ventilator?
No. I almost didn't even really take this that seriously until I really hit the point where I was needing where I was needing this inhaler. But I guess it's so unusual for me to go to the hospital or to think in my own personal experience in terms of needing something like that it wouldn't have even really entered my mind. And I think it's part of it is just because I don't habitually default to medical care. So it never really entered my mind to actually think that it was ever going to progress towards something like that. And no pre-existing conditions, swift and powerful. I've had flus before. They were not that dissimilar, except here you had this extra set of symptoms, the achy, the fatigue, the breathing, the lack of taste and smell, and just how powerful it was. It just hit me huge.
Did you have a lot of friends or family members or coworkers that had it, or were you just an outlier here?
Actually, a few people that had showed up to my grand opening told me that they got it as well. So I imagine maybe I probably either picked it up there or, I mean, who knows? There's a couple different scenarios. We traced the contacts. I could have gotten it from 2 weeks before. I had been shaking a lot of hands. I may have been the guy who transferred it to other people. You follow? As I was going through my little deep dive there, I can't tell if somebody else gave it to me. I don't really know. I do know that the Department of Health, because I didn't get my results till 10 days after, they told me to be very careful about really going back and alarming people. But the people who got it actually reached out to me.
Wow. You know, even what you're describing, the test sounds like this, like it's so painful. Like I would be afraid to even get tested. I don't like when people stick things anywhere in any orifice. I got to tell you.
Well, I'm with you right there, 100%. You know, at that point in time, I learned when I was recovered. Remember, I was in quarantine for 2.5 weeks. I didn't see my family. I have a 2-year-old, a 13-year-old, and of course my wife, and I didn't see them in person for 2.5 weeks. I was in a remote room in my parents' house. My parents stayed downstairs. Everybody was dressed like it was hazardous material. And I would wake up each morning and there'd be some fresh squeezed orange juice, some green juice, and just some light food throughout the day, like soups. Very whole food, very nutrient rich, a lot of phytochemical rich foods, which, as I would talk about with Dr. Furman and vice versa, he talking to all of us, that's really the key to healthy food. It's making sure that it's very micronutrient rich. So you turn on that whole other element of that whole second deeper layer of your immune system that doesn't get turned on when you're really just taking calories and you just get some basic vitamins and minerals. But I was getting all of that food fed to me throughout the course of the day. My appetite, of course, dropped off to like not much at all. I just dealt with it. My parents showed up. I didn't even see them. I just showed up. The food was there like a beautiful jail cell. The food just showed up at the door and I just ate. I just lied on my bed. And that's when I started tuning in to what was going on around me because I didn't really know what was going on around me. It wasn't until I really got out of the house that I walked out and I woke up to a different world because, then the grocery stores were, completely different than the last time I had been in one. So it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. Just, I'd like to read a few comments. John Debbie says, so scary that he's in such fantastic shape, and yet it took him down. So glad he recovered. And Paul has an interesting question. Could you ask him if he feels angry that he contracted this illness when it originated from animals or animal farming?
No, because that stuff's completely out of my control. Where it came from, how it got to me, it's completely irrelevant. I I only really get worried about the things that are within my control that I am not in alignment with, right? So
And
those things, I can't do anything about that.
right. I know that you've been long-term friends with Dr. Joel Furman. I think you guys even work together, and you're the one that always used to say, I remember we did a presentation once, you said, make the switch to nutrient rich. I was wondering, did he ever advise you maybe to fast during your recovery?
It's been an interesting experience with Dr. Furman over the years, because I know he started off his whole world with writing Fasting and Eating for Health. I worked with him on that book for a little while, so I knew a lot about fasting. And I've gone to True North Health for probably every 3 to 4 years for the past 20 years. So I do 2-week fasts. I love water only fasting. It's such a rejuvenating thing. But I don't think that this was the time to do that, right? First of all, I already had a nutrient rich body. My body was loaded and saturated with micronutrients. Um, I think I needed to free up energy, but still get, for healing, but still get a slurry of nutrient rich foods to help deal with this. I was drinking, I normally don't drink fresh squeezed orange juice, but I was coming from mom. And so I was drinking fresh squeezed orange juice. I wanted a lot of vitamin C, and there was a lot of call around that. And frankly, I was in a stupor, so I was just going with it. I'll live with it. So I took in some fresh squeezed orange juice. I was drinking fresh squeezed kale juice, and I was eating like vegetable bean type soups. So so no, I really didn't. Basically, I was intermittent fasting anyway, because there were times where I just didn't eat for 16 hours before I ate again. My appetite was so low, I was basically fasting anyway.
Wow.
Yeah,
Let's see. Natalie says, how long were you sick for?
2 weeks. Where out of that 2 week period, I would say 7 to 10 days was really hard. I mean, I couldn't imagine any more fluid coming out of my body. I mean, after a while, when I was blowing my nose, I thought I was like blowing out brain fluid, because I'm like, where's all this coming from? I already eat super clean. I just couldn't understand what it was, but man, mucus was huge.
Wow. What was it like being in a hospital? Because I mean, my heart goes out to the people that have to work at a hospital now, because they're putting themselves at risk as well.
Well, I actually never got to the emergency room. I stayed in triage. No one wanted to come anywhere close to me. I mean, it was like a science fiction movie. They were so covered up. It was, I asked, I said, can you give me an X-ray? Can you do something? I was just like anybody else. Forget I knew anything about health at all, right? When you're there, you're like, God, how do you get over this? Am I gonna die? Right? You're just not. I wasn't thinking from any major set of wisdom at that point. And but I never even made it into the emergency room. They kept me right in triage.
And that's where you stayed for 8 days?
No, no, no. I only stayed in the hospital for a day. They didn't want me in the hospital. I went home. Somebody picked me up, and I just went home, and that's where I stayed. I stayed in a one room for 2.5 weeks. The only time I came out was that towards the latter side, I started just taking walks, because I had no wind. When what part of what started me talking about this was just a week ago, and you wouldn't have learned about this had this, what I'm about to tell you, not happened. I stopped over to my parents' house to help them out with a few things, and my mother gave me an article from my town in Livingston, which is an affluent town, all the resources in the world, all the precautions in the world. Of the people tested, 305 people tested positive, but 11% died. This is where Jeff Nelson would have found out about me. 11% died, and of the 11%, 78.2% were under 49. So they were ages 18 to 49. Now, I felt that to be startling. That's when I then took I just took a picture right there at my parents' kitchen table, and I put it up on Facebook, and all of a sudden, within 24 hours, there were 350 comments on it. And that's only 6 days ago. Since then, I've launched another Facebook group called the COVID Prevention and Recovery Network, and we have 400 plus people over there. And so this is something that's really on people's minds. But it was really the fact that this is more serious than people think. And part of the story was that here's a guy who teaches and promotes and helps people optimize the way they live. I'm an optimal living guy, but I got it.
Have you talked to any of our mutual colleagues that like Dr. Allen Mollenhauer or Dr. Pam Popper? Do they know that what you've been through?
I actually haven't talked to them. The only person I've talked to from our mutual network is Joel.
And what, I'm just curious what he had to say about it. Was it because you were so run down physically? I mean, tired, not that you were run down physically, but you know what I mean? Burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah, I actually, believe it or not, wasn't burning the candle at both ends. I actually was getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep every single day. It's just that I had too much in my day. So I was overexerted. I wasn't getting up early and going to bed late at night. I was following what I teach, or practicing what I preach. But I was just overexerted during the wakeful hours. So I was still, overexerted and under recuperated. So I had a buildup of energy debt. Joel, Dr. Furman, as most people would know him, I was just actually talking to a mutual friend with Dr. Furman just about an hour and a half ago. And, Joel knows I understand health. So I don't think he was that alarmed by it, especially when he was right there. He was with me. We shook hands that night because all of the social distancing measures hadn't really kicked into gear. So he really didn't get that alarmed by it. I asked him just prior whether or not we were going to actually hold the event itself. So I think him as a physician and me as a, like a coach and practitioner, I don't think it had really alarmed either of us at that stage of the game. And, he knows I eat nutrient rich, and he knows that I talk a lot about managing your energy. So I think he was confident that I knew what to do. So he didn't really get that alarmed. But I think his own stance has been more dialed in on this over the last 4 weeks. So I think if it had happened right now and I called him and I talked to him specifically about that, I think he would have advised me, maybe with more information. But he's very knowledgeable about the subject, of course, but he didn't really say that much at that time.
When was this exactly that you started getting symptoms?
Well, the grand opening was the 14th. I got symptoms by the 18th.
Yeah, and this was before the sheltering in place started.
That's correct. And I learned that I was actually very early in this process when it was maybe at its peak. I don't know where it's at, And then when I got 2.5 weeks later, I thought, okay, well, everybody's back to work. Maybe this whole thing's winding down. Understanding the arc of this has been really part of the trick. So when I got out and was actually on my way up, people around me were just tuning in to how serious and significant this was. And that's why I think that article got so many responses, because I was already on my way out during the still hitting the crest of this. And I was already out and antibodies built, and I'm now beginning to thrive because I don't really, part of it's that I just don't have the fear and worry of getting it again.
Well, that's true. You do have immunity now to this. That's the one bright light. Yeah. What was it like explaining to your young children that they couldn't see daddy for 2.5 weeks?
Well, I don't think my 13-year-old cared very much. I think he's playing the Fortnite God thing right now. I don't see him much during the day anyway. I see him at night when we have family time, but he was okay with it. We talked on FaceTime. That's the beauty of technology. My 2.5-year-old, I don't even think she realized it for the first couple days. Then she started to miss daddy, and we FaceTimed, and then she even got used to that. So there's been it's interesting because there's been a lot of silver linings to this. As treacherous as this has been, at the same time, there's been a lot of silver linings. But for me, what I'm about to say is not really, it's not something that I think everyone is seeing, because I already had a high level of health going into this. I didn't have like the standard American diet, way of life, and the way people live when they eat that way. I'll use eating as the benchmark. Um, I wasn't in transition from an unhealthy way of life to a healthy way of life. I was already living as optimal as I can be at this time, right? I keep getting better, but I was as optimal as I could be where I was on March 14th. So um, I was able to get hit hard, respond fast, and then get into the recovery process. A lot of other people just are not having that experience. It's dragging out because their body's not as responsive. And of course, some people are dying. And frankly, a lot of people have died. I mean, I think the last number that I checked was 40,600 people across America. So, and by the way, and what I've been preaching over the last week is that I do not think for a second that is solely from the virus. I think it's the interaction of the virus plus what was going on, age, underlying conditions, energy levels, level of health from their previous usual lifestyle, all those factors, the environment that they're in, even their psychological capability to even deal with this, right? Like how they're just responding to it, because they, one crappy thought can lead to really crappy emotions, which can lead to seriously crappy downward spiraling feelings, which in and of itself can be a catalyst to this really going the wrong way.
Well, Emily says she loves your optimism. It's refreshing. And Nirvana says that you don't necessarily have immunity because you've already had the virus. It's not been proven. What have they told you about it?
Well, whoever just said that, was it Nirvana?
Somebody named Nirvana.
Nirvana, great, cool name. I think you're 100% right. I don't think that I'm immune from this. I think that this is novel. I think I could, in fact, get it again. And I've ratcheted up the lifestyle fundamentals that I live in accordance with, to protect myself from that. And if I get it again, I'll probably respond, very similar to how I did before. But I think I may have more antibodies towards it. And I think I might be more oriented to not getting it at this point, but the risk is always there. You're 100% right.
Right. What did the test, I mean, you're freaking me out with the test. When you told me that they stuck something in you, I thought you were intubated, and I got really scared because I used to be a respiratory therapist. But does the test really, really hurt?
Oh, it doesn't really hurt. It's extremely uncomfortable. I mean, they shove a swab that's this long. I mean, this long. And it just disappeared all the way up. Like I felt like they were poking my brain. I mean, all of a sudden I went from being in a stupor like this to my eyes just welling up and just wanting to bawl because it was so uncomfortable. And they do it twice because it goes up both nostrils. So I never got to the point where I needed to be intubated and have anything like a ventilator. This was my ventilator. So, and it's basically an inhaler. It was causing me to breathe deeply. And, there was some medication in there to open up the airways. So look, Bruce Lee, who's one of the famous martial artists of all time, he said, you do the right thing at the right time, including run at times. And he was the best martial artist ever. So to me, I have no ideology and I have nothing. If I need medication, I'm going for it because it really helped me during that time. But it was just the crutch. It helped me get through the tough part. And it's the way you handle it. Ultimately, the body's in charge.
Wow. It's very inspiring. You have really a great attitude about this.
Well, look, I'll say it to you this way. There was a comment on the big Facebook article that I did about a week ago. It was by a person who knows me for some time. Her name is Michelle. And she said, you know what, John Allen, that's just like you, to alchemize an experience, put it into language and words and share it with other people. I've done that my whole life. I've always had a very scientist approach. I come to conclusions slowly. And then once I have an understanding, I act swiftly. And I think that pre-orientation to this is part of what helped me through it, because I really didn't get that alarmed.
How long have you been on a nutrient-rich plant-based diet?
Since I'm 19. I was a competitive bodybuilder. You probably know this, AJ. I probably told you this one.
Yeah, we remember we did a presentation at the Monkey Gym that time together.
Yes, right. The Monkey Bar Gym. Yeah, I was a competitive bodybuilder. I mean, I woke up and ate 30 eggs and a chicken a day, and a token vegetable on the side, as Harvey Diamond used to say. And that was the extent of the actual nutritious food that I used to eat. Maybe a little bit of fruit in my Cheerios. And I lived that way until I was 19 years old. And I'll make a very long story short. I owned a bodybuilder's gym. I was competing for the Mr. New Jersey. I just finished. And I'm back just relaxing in the afterglow of being third in the Mr. New Jersey. And I get this rag called the Health Reporter by a guy named T.C. Fry. And that ultimately led me to the American Natural Hygiene Society and this whole group that we have as a mutual network. That's where I met Dr. Furman, et cetera. But, you know, I moved from that diet and I was 245 pounds. And about 6-8 months later, I was 170 pounds eating nothing but natural food. And that was as a 20-year-old, which was an extremely uncomfortable experience to go through because people thought I actually got sick. And of course, we didn't know how to do it like we do today. So, you know, I was probably more of a fruitarian, you know, I don't even know what Aryan you want to call me at that point, but I was eating mostly natural food. And I'm 51, so that's 30 years ago. So I've had times, periods where I've vacillated somewhat, very short periods where I would have gone, you know, 6 degrees to the right. I'm only talking like 1 or 2 degrees either way. So I've been eating this way a very long time. Matter of fact, you know, some people would say you and I are very disciplined. We're not. We're averse to the pain that comes that eating unhealthy brings. At this point, you can't tolerate it at all. So, you know, that's the governor now that takes over. Plus, we love eating this way.
No, we do. And that we can have a whole conversation about how people like you and me and Joel Furman, we eat this way because we really love it. It's not because we have to, it's because
love it. Everybody love it. I mean, there's more foods, meals, and menus eating this way than any other way of eating. I mean, there's only so many things you can do with a hunk of chicken or a fish or this or that, right? You know, even if you eat small amounts of it, there's only so many fish and only so many chickens. Fruits, vegetables, you know, how many are there?
Thousands upon thousands. I heard Dr. Carrie Saunders say once there was 18,000 different kinds of legumes alone. So there's a lot of plants.
You mix those up and, you know, from smoothies to soups to salads to sorbets to this to that, you never run out of foods. And it's like an experimentation. You know, I have my top 10 and my top 10 changes like every year. I probably have 3 or 4 foods that I always eat all the time because they meet my schedule, they meet my time, they're quick, and I just love them and I'll never not eat them, right? But they're like concoctions, things that I just throw together. But all these other foods, I mean, what better than to have a palette of endless foods for you to keep making great, you know, meals and menus out of, and nobody knows that better than you do.
Absolutely. Does your whole family eat this way, and were your children raised eating this way?
My 13-year-old son was not raised eating this way because I got him when he was 4. So, and he, you know, my wife's from India. So I got him when he was 4, and he has a very ethnic Indian influence. So, you know, they're, you know, white rice is the staple, roti is the staple. They eat a lot of other foods. So to him, I influence a very great deal. My daughter, who I have since birth, she's 2.5, and she's been raised 100% plant-based, and she's not even like 90% plant-based. She's 100, like 100. She's never seen a refined food, and I don't think she's ever seen an animal product yet in her mouth.
That's amazing. People are saying you give your inspiration, you give them hope. And there's been a couple questions from Sharon and Stephanie about the inhaler. Is it an over-the-counter? What was the medication you were given? People want to know.
It's not an over-the-counter. This was prescribed. It's called Wixella, and I couldn't even begin to tell you what that is.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you know, I'm open to talking to anyone with different points of view. I know that there's a spectrum in the plant-based world of how the doctors feel about this, but you know, the fact when Jeff Nelson told me you came down with it, because I've known you for years to be extremely diligent with your diet and exercise and healthy, it freaked me out because I feel like if it could happen to you, it could happen to me. And my biggest fear is that I've been a lifelong asthmatic, which they're saying puts me at 6 times higher risk. I'm not on any medication for my asthma. I was until I moved away from LA. But I mean, it does scare me as somebody with a quote, health situation.
Well, you're a pro without a doubt, and you have asthma, and that is considered one of the top 6. I actually just read the NIH guidelines for treatment this morning. They just came out yesterday, or at least that's when I got them. And asthma is one of the top pre-existing conditions that makes this virus actually move into the stages after that 2 to 14 day incubation period, where it can turn into something nasty. Now, that said, you have an incredible level of health, but I would pay extra care to social distancing and taking this really, really seriously, because part of the reason why we're talking is people could not believe that I got it. I'm nobody special. It's just they couldn't believe, knowing my background, that I got it. That was like the last person that people in my circles ever thought would happen. And that was part of, why I think people took interest in that. So, but look, a virus is a virus. It only needs a doorway in. So keep in mind, the doorways in are obviously the hygiene elements. You take in the droplets. I have to remember to look into the camera and not look at your picture. So if I'm looking down till you're right, that's why. The droplets, just, from a surface or from anything that's floating around. Number 2, you never know from a genetic standpoint, even though most of how we experience life today is because of epigenetics, but genetics still do play a role. So you may have a susceptibility. 3, you got to pay attention to whether or not you're depleted. The entire immune system, every single function in the human body, leaving nothing out, is dependent on your energy levels. So if you're getting fearful and you're exhausting and enervating your body, you're going to lower your immune system. In my case, it wasn't that. It was just overexertion. So that's why I believe the door was wide open. And if you have pre-existing conditions like asthma, you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, you have heart disease, you have cancer, autoimmune, right? Immunosuppressant type conditions, you've got to be like maximally careful. Maximally careful. Do not mess around, because that's where you're really taking root. And this is largely a lung disease. The mild symptoms are before this really gets to the lungs. Once it gets to the lungs, you could start experiencing shortness of breath. That's why, AJ, there's a lot of talk about the like the pulse oximeters, because if your oxygen levels, even if you don't feel shortness of breath, but your oxygen levels start going down, you could still be hanging out and talking with people and be like, see an early sign towards a COVID situation, because it's already reached your lungs and it's starting to close off air sacs. And I'm trying to think of what the term is, but you'll just have to leave it for right now. Something's not being created and the air sacs start to close. And then all of a sudden you're at that next stage of after like your second week where things could really go awry. And if you have pre-existing conditions going into that second week, it's a worrisome condition. So, and then by the way, I will say the third part, I wrote this in a blog post, and I was listening to, I don't know if you want to ask a question, but let me just say this real quick, because I think this is really important. Sometimes my answer is a little long here. I was listening to a story on MSNBC, and the interviewer was talking to the wife of a man who was 42 years old, and he had just died. 2 weeks before, he had no symptoms whatsoever. Father, doing, beacon of the community type guy, right? And as I'm listening to it, I'm sitting there, I'm still in the throes of this, and I'm sitting here listening, and this is what they said. They brought him in for shortness of breath. They gave him hydrochloroquine, which, by the way, there is absolutely no convincing evidence. And by the way, I got this information from the National Institutes of Health. There is no convincing evidence, pro or con, that any drug right now on the market will have any effect on this virus. Not my words, National Institute of Health. That's number one. Number two, they brought him in and they immediately put him on a ventilator. Now, if you put a person on a ventilator, it's kind of like metaphorically wearing eyeglasses. Your eyes don't get stronger, they can start to get weaker over time. So you put a person straight to intubation. So he mentally and physically was starting to shut down. Number three, they gave him an experimental drug on top of that. Now, I don't even know the name to that, but an experimental drug. Drugs are highly toxic, pharmacologic effects, block body processes. They don't enhance them, they block them. They stop them because those pharmacological events, that's why you use drugs, because you can get to a certain point where natural body processes could kill you. So that's why you use a pharmaceutical drug in those critical moments. So who knows what that drug was? But here's the kicker. After that, they gave him 3 blood pressure medications. One, then another, then another. So you're talking about bringing the blood pressure down, and then all of a sudden they said 10 days later, he had nothing left. So you're giving experimental drugs, one drug you know or not sure that it's even going to affect it, which I have to believe is the same for the second. Then you're giving him blood pressure medication, putting him on a ventilator, and he was dead 10 days later. So given that, AJ, you know this stat, drugs and medication are what number of cause of death? Is it number 6?
I believe it was either 4th or 5th.
So if that's true, can you throwing the kitchen sink, to use the doctor's words, can you tell me throwing the kitchen sink didn't play a role here? I absolutely believe that over medication or reliance on medication without a smart understanding of what you're doing in and of itself can kill a COVID patient.
That is so scary. We have some really nice comments. You're amazing. It's so great to hear someone speaking so sensibly about this virus. Is there a way that people can follow you? Like, if you tell me, I'll look for it when you're talking. Like, is it best to follow you on Facebook? What do you prefer if people want to get to know more about you or follow your new group?
Well, if you're right in, of course, I'm on Facebook, John Allen Mollenhauer. And by the way, whenever I'm in video, you'll always hear me say, my name is John Allen, but my friends call me Jam. Professionally known as John Allen, or my friends call me Jam. So Jam is just my initials. If you're in this conversation and you want to learn more, you can look up the COVID-19 Prevention and Recovery Network. But if you want to get there really fast, this is just a forwarding domain. There's no website there. Just go to nofearcovidclear.com. nofearcovidclear.com. It'll take you right to this Facebook group. And I've been doing some live videos there. I'm doing some interviews starting next week. And the reason why we named it that is we're wanting to get people out of the fear component of this and to get COVID clear, to use emergency medical care the way I did, but then right now, especially during the shutdown, to ratchet up. This is the time to start optimizing the way you live so that you're on the right side of this, because this is not going to be our last rodeo. There'll be more COVIDs. And then the last way you can reach out to me is just go to my primary website, which is johnallenjam.com, and you can get on my email list. And then you'll know.
And you'll give me these. I can put these in the show notes because I don't want to lose you on the screen. I'm having trouble finding these right now while we're talking, right? But you'll tell me what they are, so we can put them in the show notes.
Yep.
So we have a nice comment from Paul. I think it's to you because I've answered this many times. You have great skin and look super healthy for your age. Why do they have to put for your age? Why can't people just tell us we look? I'm teasing you, Paul. So they're asking, John, what do you eat in a day typically, and what foods do you avoid, and how long have you eaten this way? I think you said for 30 years you've been eating this way.
You do look awesome, AJ.
Oh, thank you. But we want to know what you eat and what you do for your skin.
I don't do anything for my skin. I don't put foods in my body that shouldn't be there. And I'm not a vegan. I've never been vegan. Actually, I've gone for long periods of time actually being vegan because I've learned the best health information in the world from the vegan community. But I've actually never been for long periods of time a sustained vegan, maybe a year or two at a time. But 90 to 95%, sometimes 100%, it is always foods, meals, and menus that are derived from leafy greens, green vegetables, colored vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils. I do eat nuts and seeds, sometimes some whole grains. And I will periodically, have a little bit of fish or chicken in my diet, maybe 5%. And it's all, if anything, in a given week, it would never be more than maybe 3 to 6 ounces. And part of the reason why I do that is because I personally, this is just me personally, I personally um, sometimes feel a little bit better when I do that. I did a paper with Dr. Michael Clapper on this, called "The Failure to Thrive," and you can look that up. But I've found that sometimes when people include a very, very small amount of animal product, they do a little bit better, and they don't feel like they've left their old world too far. But I do not promote animal products at all. Never have, never have for nutritional reasons, because I believe you can get everything from plants other than B12. So I eat a predominantly plant-based diet. It's all nutrient rich, emphasis on the micronutrients, because that's what's really turning on your immune system. That's what keeps, you know, the overall diet. You're getting all of what you do need, no significant amount of what you don't need. And when you eat foods in as close to their natural state as possible, I mean, how could your body not really function at optimal, and your skin, which is the largest organ in the body, probably be clear? So we're not promoting advanced and rapid aging. That's why you don't see the crow's feet at our eyebrows, right? At our eyes, because our skin is it's moist. We're a moist robot. We're not
Or
like
moist. That's funny.
we're
Oh,
not gonna die. We're not like dying. We're not drying out. So I think it's that. I will also say I'm very, very proactive around recovery. I don't tire out or burn out very easily. It's only under extreme circumstances, like I had in this particular case, where nature doesn't care. The business didn't care whether or not I chose to only do a little that day. The grand opening wasn't going to happen unless we got it done. So sometimes you go way out of balance, and then you have to recover appropriately. And I had made plans for that, but recovery is everything. And I'll go as far as saying it's even more important than nutrition, because you're talking about your very life force here. Digestion doesn't happen when your life force is low. If you're not getting enough sleep, like, you won't get any other aspect of lifestyle right. You will not get any other aspect of lifestyle right, because you'll be frankly too tired, and you'll have low grade anxiety because you have low grade fatigue behind the scenes. And that, if you want your biggest benchmark for health, in addition to an amazing diet, your biggest benchmark is going to be, hey, do I have genuine reserves of energy? Do I feel recuperated? Am I in energy balance? If you can't answer that question, you got to focus there too.
right.
And those are my.
Michelle says, should a person with mild to moderate rheumatoid arthritis be concerned? I stopped taking my meds because it lowers its immunity. It's interesting, John, before the sheltering started, I played pickleball, this really fun game that we have in the desert. And I hurt my arm, and it was like 3 months. It still hadn't gotten better, and I got an X-ray, and so he wanted to give me a steroid shot. And this was like I believe Tuesday, March 17th, and I said no. I mean, normally, and I'm still in pain, but I'm taking it real seriously. Like, I don't want to lower my immunity at all.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, everybody, I'm not a medical doctor, and these are not my typical subjects. I know rheumatoid arthritis I believe is on that pre-existing. Um, do me a favor. I lost the question just a tad. I need to.
Well, she's saying that she stopped taking her RA meds because it lowers her immunity, and she's wondering if she should be concerned. She should, we're going to have doctors on actually later today. She could ask that question too.
I would ask that question later to the doctor. They'll give you an accurate answer, and they have the clinical experience on that.
Absolutely. So before this hit, what were you, because we lost touch. I mean, we saw each other a lot at the Veg Source conference and at the PCRM conferences, and then, life gets busy. Before this hit, what were you doing?
Well, I have a center that's open 11 hours a day, and I'm an entrepreneur, so I grow that, and I train people year round. Of course, with teaching people how to make sure that they've got the energy and health foundation to really be able to function and perform well in their lives. So, I've been writing. I have another book coming out next year. I'm a dad, of a 2.5-year-old. Anybody who has children, those first 2.5 years are like an all-in endeavor. So I've been raising my daughter, which has changed me dramatically. I don't
I
blame
didn't think you'd ever get married because when I knew you, you seemed kind of like a playboy to me, to be honest.
Well, I actually, let's deal with that head on. You're 100% right. I was a playboy. You know why I was a playboy? I was a playboy because I was on a heroic quest that took me 20 years to put together the work that I have today. So therefore, I didn't want to commit to anybody. I've probably lived in 8 different locations. I've I've had to go where I needed to go to understand the different aspects of lifestyle. I've had to hang out in communities for long periods of time to understand that aspect of lifestyle. And I frankly didn't want to drag anybody else through that. Typically when you're with somebody for a long period of time, it leads towards engagement and marriage and having kids like it has now. So I think it was only fitting that I got married when the bulk of that heroic quest was over, when I didn't really have to travel all over the place. I was no longer a seeker, I was a finder. So once I was a finder, I got married and had kids and settled down. So I wasn't a playboy because I was like, some, some
That's okay. I'm just pulling your
I
leg. I
know,
was very happy to hear when you were getting
but it has
married.
a real answer to it. That's my point.
Yeah.
It wasn't a hedonistic. When I say everybody, I was a playboy. It wasn't like I was leaving this kind of hedonistic lifestyle. It's just that I was single all the time, right? And that's what
You were a playboy of convenience.
I was a playboy, exactly. And
That's terrific. You used to work either with or for Dr. Joel Furman, right? A long time ago?
yeah, I helped him launch Dr. Furman online, and I worked with him a little bit on his first book, Fasting and Eating for Health. But I worked with him for probably the first 2 years of launching Dr. Furman online, just when he was producing Eat to Live, and um, and then once that book came out, I was 35 at the time, so I thought my life was nearing. I was like, I got to take advantage of this time period right now when I was the most driven, and that's when I entered that quest. So, or at least the next phase of it. So I did work with him. I learned a ton from him, and quite honestly, he for me has been the biggest influence. He's been the biggest influence for what I teach today because he's a guy. He's got 4 kids. He's emerged a whole new paradigm around eating. He's a medical doctor and he's an elite athlete. So, and he's a natural hygienist, and he understands, he's one of the doctors in the vegan community, and he understands all this stuff really well. So, spending time with him, he was a huge influence on me.
How did your paths cross? Is it just because you both live in New Jersey that you met?
No, it was I met him at a natural hygiene conference. That's where I met Dr. McDougall. That's where I met Alan Goldhammer. That's where I met a lot of the docs that I probably met Jeff Nelson back then. And I just remember seeing him speak and going, man, that guy's going to be huge one day.
Yeah.
All these doctors are huge. Isn't it amazing?
Yep.
Like all these doctors got huge. T. Colin Campbell, the Pleasure Trap, Dr. McDougall, huge. Everybody from that group got huge because they all had the right perspective on health.
It's funny because a lot of the people I'm interviewing now are not huge yet, but I already see it. Like I'm interviewing these GI doctors that not a lot of people know, and I'm already thinking, you're next. You're next. Yeah.
What age group are they?
They're like 30s.
Right. So they're going to be the next crop of like really huge doctors.
I know.
That's when we met them. They were 30 years ago, so they were probably right around their 30s, 35.
Incredible. So Gina's asking what a natural hygienist is. They've actually changed their name from Natural Hygiene Association to the National Health Association.
Yeah, the Natural Hygiene Society. You remember the story I told earlier about when I was a bodybuilder? I was living in this world, and then all of a sudden, 1 year later, I'm hanging out with these 70, 80, and 90-year-olds in this small group that puts out a magazine called healthscience.org, Health Science Magazine. And they come from a long line, these natural hygienists. These are people that promote all of the basic fundamentals of healthy living. So they would talk about steering clear of enervation, eating, a plant-centric diet or vegan diet, about fitness, about getting sun, about all the necessary functions, talked about fasting, all the necessary functions for you to live a very healthy way of life. They were it's actually a precursor to what I would today call a performance lifestyle. You know, Dr. Jim, Jim Lennon, when they put out the Natural Hygiene Handbook, you can still buy that today. It'll blow your mind because it talks about all the different aspects of lifestyle as they knew them then. But it's basically from Hippocrates all the way up to Russell Trout, to Herbert Shelton, to the modern day, luminaries like T. Colin Campbell, Joel Furman, you know, uh, Dr. Goldhammer, Dr. McDougall, all these, Dr. Esselstyn, all these modern day health luminaries, to the Chef AJs and the Jams, right, who are out there, who hung around this crowd for a long period of time. And while we're not medical doctors, we're luminaries in our own right, because we're in the front lines, bringing people into a healthy lifestyle and really helping them optimize the way they live. Whether it's a deep dive in nutrition, or is what I do, which is go deep and deep to a certain point, but go really wide across all the different aspects of lifestyle, which we all need to know, because like we said earlier, AJ, become masterful in nutrition, but be a burnout. And I guarantee you'll get completely different results.
Yep.
Get great sleep and eat really well, but have no exercise in your life. Do all three of those perfect, but stay out of the sun, right? You could keep going. I could keep going, right? Have all those things doing phenomenal, but then be overwhelmed with stress, and everything sort of doesn't spin the same way. So it's really about, getting a handle on your whole life that ultimately, at the end of the day, produces optimal health and performance. But if you don't get food right, I mean,
yeah,
you're right there. You don't get food right. The beauty of food, and it's part of why I've always been a little bit jealous, AJ, of like the position that you get to maintain, because people eat 3 to 6 times a day. And you've always brought so much fun and joy and laughter and expertise, both in terms of health knowledge, to the practical reality that we prepare food 3 to 6 times a day. And that's always been fun to watch you do your thing.
Well, thank you so much. We have time for one more question, so I'm going to make it a fun one from Kathy. How did you meet your wife?
She was this story always brings a little tear to my eye, because she was an intern in my company. And she was very, very quiet. A person working with me in marketing brought her in, and she was a mom, and she had never really felt any stress. But in her culture, she was sort of relegated to the back door. Just take care of the baby, and that's it. And she has an MBA. She's wicked smart. And she came in to my office, and she said, "Mr. Mollenhauer," my wife's 12 years younger than me. She says, "Mr. Mollenhauer," she says, "I see you're doing this, but you could be doing this." And she ripped out this map that she'd driven in crayons about what I could be doing. And I was like, wow. And we just started spending a lot of time together implementing it, and the rest, nature took off.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm just glad you're here to tell the story, because when I first heard, I was like, oh my God, and I'm just so glad you're looking well. You seem to be feeling well. And thank you for sharing this story, because I think it's going to help a lot of people, not that we want people to panic, but we want people to be safe, as you say.
Yeah, we want people to really get out of fear, get COVID clear, whether you've had it or not, because this won't be your first rodeo. There'll be other things coming down the pike. If I was going to give one final message to our talk, our conversation, it would be: get your health ratcheted up to the highest levels. If you think you're healthy now, go 2 bars higher. And then when you get there, go 2 bars higher. Don't get, crazy, right? Don't turn into a hypochondriac, but optimize. Get to optimal. Get to optimal. If you think you're here and you've heard 10 things you should be doing and aren't doing them yet, get them to here, because that's your greatest protection. And there's no joke in that. That's not motivation. That's not positive thinking. That's reality. The people who are in that position were like me, who got it and recovered fast, or didn't get it because they had true immunity. They had their defenses high. No one, as that I think it was Nirvana said, is entirely immune. But you want to have strong defenses. And the only way you can get that is what the doctors, ironically, the doctors, AJ, in this entire, when I was going through the hospital, this is what they said to me: health is the only cure.
That is beautiful. And that could be said for so many things. I love it. Thank you.
This was awesome.
Thank you so much. Great catching up with you. Guys, come back in 30 minutes when I'll be interviewing Dr. Alona Pulde and Dr. Matt Letterman from the New York Times bestseller Forks Over Knives. I believe it's called Family Plan book. It's just been so great catching up with you, Jam. And I'm so glad you're well. And
Thank you so much.
my pleasure. Be
Take
well,
care.
be well, stay well, and eat well. And
Yes. Yeah.
all right. Take care, everybody. Bye.